Hey, and welcome to this Leadership Lounge today with Edwin Fillies. So happy that he will join us and that we'll get to hear his perspective, also from a South African perspective, I suppose. So first of all, the European Leaders Learning Community, I think probably many of you already know what it is, but it is a community of leaders in Europe that have formed and have access to a website with a lot of different resources that are being loaded every month, basically every week. So there's many resources there available for you. We also have a fire pit story relay going on. I'm pretty excited about that. We have all kinds of leaders that are telling just a very short story and passing on the log, just as we, even during lockdown, are sitting around a fire pit and sharing stories. So if you get the log, then please share a good story and pass it on to another leader. And that other leader then have five days, basically, or a week to load the next one. Also, just to say that it's not long ago we had a fantastic FutureWise Leadership Summit online, and the recording is now available on the website. So if you missed it, with Dr. Ruth Perrin, who looked at changing shape, looked at how the new generations, they are quite different from us older ones, and just how to really understand and reach out to the next generation. We also have some amazing LDX, like short videos on from this month as well. And there was one, has a fear of control made us wimpy leaders? And that's Elaine Leakey that asked that question. And there was another LDX talk with Alice Buberg, who's from Norway. And she talked about servant-hearted leadership takes courage and humility. And there was great articles also just posted online this month. If servanthood is an antidote, what is the problem? Gary McKinney, he asks. And Steve Mayers, he wrote, how do we incorporate a developmental bias in our leadership? So just amazing resources, really. Do make use of them.
Yeah, and I think one of the good things is, even on my base here in Rostrevor, we've quite often, for a staff meeting, used the whole meeting to watch FutureWise, or we used it to watch an LDX talk or one of the interviews. So we encourage you, even in teams, leadership teams, or as whole bases or communities, to consider taking one of these videos and using them. They're from as short as 10 minutes to an hour and a half. So there's plenty of resources and ways that you can fit it into your schedule as a base. So. Okay, so Tove, is there anything else we need to say before we go into today's interview?
Probably not. I mean, we could say that the next theme coming up in July and August. It's I don't know. How warm is it in your end right now, Johnny?
Well, it's about 14 degrees outside.
14. Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't say that we have 24. It's quite hot here.
Yeah.
So we're moving into a summer theme, and assuming that quite a lot of people take some time off. And it's called Recharge. So I'm looking forward to that. It will be completely different from our other months, where you will have short videos from different leaders, also about how they recharge partly. So I'm looking forward to that.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So it will be a bunch of really good short videos over the summer that I think are going to be encouraging to you all. Okay. Well, why don't I jump in then and introduce the theme for this month, and then our special guest today. So you've probably picked up, some of you may not be, if this is one of your first kind of visits to the Leadership Lounge, is that every month in the European Learning Community, we try to follow a theme. Last month, there was a whole series of resources that we put together around the themes of polarization in the world and how do we respond as YWAM. And now, as Tove said, we're into this kind of 3-month cycle where we're looking at these 3 traditional pitfalls that leaders commonly fall into in every area of life. Money, sex, and power, essentially. Only we're doing it in the order of money, power, sex. So this month is we're looking at power, and the point is not necessarily to be really negative on in one level, but it is to raise this very real reality, is that in leadership we do find it can be very tempting to fall into financial mismanagement, inappropriate relationships, and using power in a way that feeds often narcissism, it feeds ego, all these things that are just so opposite to the kingdom of God. But they are common traps for leaders to fall into. And as a learning community, it wouldn't be wise for us to imagine that they're not there. And so we're really wanting to put together a month of really positive, healthy resources on how, as YWAM, we can be a mission that uses power in the way that Jesus used it, which was to come underneath and to serve. And so with that in mind, it's a real privilege for me to introduce our guest today. Many of you will know Edwin Fillies. Edwin has been a leader on the continent of Africa for many years. He was also a leader in Europe, in Switzerland. He's married to a Swiss woman. Edwin is the base leader in Muizenberg, probably one of YWAM's biggest bases. Always amazing stuff happening down there in Cape Town. It's where I did my DTS many moons ago. I remember right after my DTS coming back to my parents had moved from Northern Ireland to Harpenden, and I was in my dad's bookshop, and I was having a bit of an existential life crisis, as you do after a DTS, and wondering what I should be doing, and should I go and become a missionary and save the world, or do what my mom and dad were recommending, which was to go and finish my history degree. And this guy came into my dad's bookstore called Edwin, who happened to be from Cape Town, and we had a great chat. And that day he said, Johnny, it's always a principle in my life to finish the things that I start. And I had started university before my degree. And so Edwin's words were ringing in my ears 20 years ago when I decided to go back to university. So 25 years ago, 26. So that was a long time. So Edwin has been mentoring and giving advice to leaders all over the world for many decades now, or a few decades. So Edwin, I think you might need to unmute yourself, but it's a real delight to have you with us today on this Leadership Lounge.
Thank you, Johnny. It's really great to be a part of this conversation. So, of course, I'm really blessed to be part of this community. I think maybe my 3 years in Switzerland, leading the YWAM base in Birchini, kind of like gave me access. And also before that, helping Lauren and Aline re-pioneer the Lausanne base after my stint in 3 years in Harpenden in the Oval. Really forming years for me that you've just recounted. Your dad and mom, they've been, real spiritual parents, really speaking the right word at the right time into my life. Because I thought when I arrived in 94, 1st of January in England, having walked on the beach, the previous day before taking my flight to London Heathrow, I thought I am not going to make it. I'm going to die. So I needed people like your folks who really just encouraged me not to give up. And so I spent 3 years in Harpenden, and then 2 years later, 2 years after, 2 years after that, I spent time at the Lausanne base, helping in 96, 7, and 8 in Lausanne, helping the re-pioneering of the base before moving back to South Africa. So yeah, I love Europe. I love Europe so much that I married a European. So, it's just so good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks, Edwin. Well, I wonder if we'll just get started, and I think many people watching this will realize that this week I guess it's been a sad week for us as YWAMers, in that Floyd McClung has passed away, and obviously he's been ill for a number of years, and we're so glad he's out of suffering. But there's also the sadness that this guy, who was a literal giant and a spiritual giant for many in YWAM, has passed. I wonder if we could just start this interview by maybe if you have some reflections on of what Floyd meant to you, maybe stories going back to your early days in YWAM to more recent times where he's been in Cape Town, where you've been.
Of course, the the thing about Floyd, he's, just a larger than life kind of a figure physically, but also spiritually, he just made such a huge impact in my life, even before I met him, with the Father Heart of God teaching, and of course, following his work in the red light district. But I had the privilege of meeting Floyd in 1991. It was still during apartheid. It was just after the release of Nelson Mandela. There was still a travel embargo, for South Africans flying to South America. So I had to make the trip via Europe. So I had to fly from Cape Town to Luxembourg, and then Luxembourg to London, spend a few days there with Ian Muir, who hosted me for 3 days, and then put me back on a plane via Madrid, Lisbon, Bogota, Caracas, and I ended up in Santiago, Chile. And Floyd was one of the teachers in the LTS. He taught 2 weeks on how to lead by grace, and it was an exposition on the book of Galatians. Now, that just totally wrecked my life. I mean, I was, 23 at the time. It was the first field-based LTS that Aline led with David Hamilton hosting the LTS on his base in Santiago, outside of the capital, Santiago. And so I think, I still don't know how did I get into that select group of leaders, the first field-based LTS, meaning the first leadership training school outside of Kona and Europe. And then I met Floyd. And I remember, going to him, just struggling with what it means to be a YWAMer in a pretty, we were moving towards becoming more two-thirds from the two-third world. But my experience in South Africa at the time was YWAM and missions was very much, a Western white experience. And so I think it was the challenge of, still how to be, how to be a missionary, in apartheid South Africa. Do you just assimilate and becoming this, Christian that only thinks about, what is to come in heaven? Or do you really believe that God can use you in a prophetic way to see the kingdom of God come on earth as it is in heaven? So I struggled with those kind of, questions. And so I remember, when Nelson Mandela came to our town, I had to sneak out of the base because he was still regarded as a terrorist, as a communist. Wow. And so I couldn't even tell my leaders, I couldn't tell my colleagues. So, I was always this guy asking the questions and sometimes maybe being the difficult one. Now I'm the leader, and now I'm having all the difficult questions, kind of having become part of, a little bit the status quo. So I know what it's like, having those questions come to me, because I was the one that used to ask those questions. And hopefully I'm still asking those questions. But I sneak out of the base, and of course I went to listen to Nelson Mandela. And I think I will never forget that, in 1990, when he came to the stadium of our local town in Worcester. And as he arrived, just such an imposing figure, tall, onto the podium, a white lady with her baby. She just shoved her baby into the arms of Nelson Mandela. And he just held up the baby, and he just held the baby. And then I just realized, there's something there that just so transcend, racial, acrimony, racial division, hatred. And so that was just something beautiful. But I did ask Floyd, I said, Floyd, this is my struggle, being a YWAMer in South Africa, because whenever you speak about justice or ask questions in regard to justice, I was always, or the answers that was always given to me, just focus on, the spiritual things. And he really just had such an amazing understanding of sharing out of his own life, how he protested against apartheid while at Bible college. And for the first time, I actually had a YWAMer. I think that said I stood up against apartheid. I was part of, praying with my feet and not just praying in my closet. And I've never heard that anywhere in YWAM at the point in time. So that to
Wow.
me was really, apart from, his warm-heartedness, he had an incredible way to make you feel heard, special. And, just that 2 weeks of teaching out of Galatians, it was just so powerful. But this is a memory that stand out for me, when it comes to Floyd. And so, of course, he advised me how to be how to lead or navigate, some of these dilemmas, of just the tension of, of just church theology that's just totally focusing on the soul, and state theology that really, the church being captured by the state, which was the case in South Africa. And he pointed me how to be a prophetic Christian, in that particular situation. And so I think, we're in a different millennia, but I think the questions are still the same. It's just a different generation. So,
yeah. And Edwin, in terms of, obviously this is a leadership learning community. We're trying to draw out kind of leadership principles. When you think of Floyd and you think of his different gifting, is there anything that you think of that we as YWAM can really, really should learn from him, or, even in terms of his own gifting or how he used it? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think what I was going to add, Johnny, I think for me, it was not just, that I had, that encounter with him, the first time during my LTS in 1991 in Santiago, Chile. But I think also for me, the hospitality, he invited me because I had 2 months that I was going to travel to Europe. And, he gave me a personal invitation. And he said, I think on your stop through Europe, backpacking through Europe, I would love for you to come and, visit me in Amsterdam. And so I think that was really special. Saying that to a young leader, of course, Rita Pretorius, she was put in charge of my hospitality. Oh my goodness. That blew me away. So she took care of me at the time. The Ark was still functioning behind the central station, and all those meetings were set up for me. But I think just the detail of Floyd, just even thinking, what will help me along my leadership journey, but also being so personal. So I think for me as a leader, there are things, in regard to vision and regard to growth and organization. But I think for me, if leadership stopped becoming personal, then I think we've lost the real edge. And so I think for me, that's one thing that I want to highlight. I always felt in my encounter with Floyd, there was this personal dimension. You were not just a little, you were not just a product on this whole, manufacturing chain, or a little, instrument on this manufacturing chain of seeing the Great Commission completed, but it was the personal attention. And I think that is where leadership, for me, really becomes, or what I learned is that leadership is very personal. And when we lose that personal touch, I think we've lost a big part, of what leadership is. And he was at the time the international executive director of YWAM. I also had the privilege, when Floyd was considering his relocation to Cape Town, Maureen Menard, a mutual friend of Floyd and I, she asked me if I could pick up Floyd at the airport in Cape Town, because he just came back from, I think, Thailand, where he met with all his church planters for all nations. And so, that was in 2006, I believe. And that was going to be the final confirmation if he was going to relocate here with Sally to Cape Town. I remember I picked up Floyd at the airport and drove him in my car, where he was staying, and just having this time in rush hour traffic, coming back from the airport into Cape Town, took a 30-minute journey, took me about an hour and 20 minutes. But I had the time with Floyd in the car, and I asked him, I said, Floyd, just making such a move, relocating from the United States, you've left Amsterdam, you've probably bought the, most expensive real estate within YWAM. how much money are you moving to Africa with? I will never forget. I will never forget it. He said he sold his house. I don't think it was a short sale, but I think it was just to break even. So Floyd was he was relocating to Africa, pretty much, with his furniture, the things that were dear to him, but just starting all over again. Now, for me, I mean, somebody with that kind of a standing within the body of Christ that would just start all over again. And he just had such a fire in his eyes. And it was not about amassing wealth for him personally. That really spoke to me. And then, of course, I think he relocated to Cape Town. And then we had every 6 weeks or 2 months, Floyd and I, for quite a number of years, we had a lunch date where we would exchange notes, and he would always speak so fondly of YWAM and his time in YWAM. And he would ask me, how is Lauren doing? How's Darlene doing? What's happening in YWAM? What's some of the cutting edge things in YWAM? And I was humbled here, my mentor from afar through his books and his teachings, and then he became a personal friend. He would take notes while I'm sharing about what God was doing in YWAM. So I think for me, being a lifelong learner as a leader, I think that just blew me away. So I think those are kind of the stuff that stood out for me, that, there's nothing for personal gain, when you are a leader after God's heart. And I learned that from Floyd.
Thanks.
Wow.
Thanks, Edwin.
Yeah, that's just beautiful. Thank you, Edwin. It's so good to have you in the same room with us here. It feels like a little bit. And just hearing your story. I just want to remind everybody that it is possible to ask questions also for Edwin, in the comments. Or even just write comments. Feel free to write a note if there's a sentence that stands out as well. That's totally possible. But Edwin, I just love how you highlighted hospitality, and I don't know who said it or where I've picked it up, but it's been said at least that those who offers hospitality, they lead. And I think that's so true, because it is you come close and you feel loved, and received. So important, this big welcome. But I'd love to hear a little bit more, since you did grow up, in South Africa during apartheid. We heard about your life just a little bit later, as a young man. But can you just share with us just a little bit more? What was it like, to grow up in that kind of, I guess, both tension and internal tension it must have been as well. Could you just map it out a little bit for us? Yeah,
thanks, Tove. I think, I'm the youngest of 10 children, 8 boys and 2 girls. Growing up in a typical African village, very rural community, about 4 hours from Cape Town. And everything was small in my family. Small house, small room, small bed. Even the dog was small. The cockroaches were small. The fleas were small. Not just that they were small, they were also poor. So so that's just my surroundings. But I was so blessed. I mean, like I say, poverty is very relative. I was very blessed in terms of the home that I grew up in, even amidst my own the brokenness within my family. And so I was taken as the youngest kid to the fields with my mom. That was part of the deal. If you're going to live on the farm of the white farmer, then one of the family has to work as a domestic worker or on the field. And that was what my mother did. My dad, he was a weekend alcoholic, and what he gave up during the week, he made up for it over the weekend. So but my mom, she was my hero. I mean, it's just, I think within the African culture and even the struggle against apartheid, what the moms had to give up, for the struggle. I mean, it's just incredible. And so she was my hero. And I think there's a memory that I will never forget, as a 4 or 5 year old, her taking me to the homestead of the white farmer, working as a servant, as a domestic worker. And in Afrikaans, that's shared with the white Afrikaner and the Khoi people. It's like a language that has been developed, in South Africa. What is built into the language is honor and respect and dignity. So that's why you would never even call an older person, by the name, even if they're 5 years older than you. You will call them, by, as uncle, auntie, like other parts of the world. And so, I think for me, there was, the realities of apartheid dawned on me as that 5-year-old when the little boy I played with outside, he called my mom by her name. Now, I mean, that was the most disrespectful thing that you could ever do, for a 5-year-old to call my mom by her name. And then she replied, and she called him in the diminutive of master, like little master. I mean, you can't translate it. It doesn't have the impact.
No.
In English, but yeah. So I'm just having some background noise here.
Yeah. That's nice.
I think for me, it basically my whole world fell apart. And on my way home, I walked with her. Sometimes she would get, remuneration, with as 5 liters, 5 liters of milk or just some food. And I said, Mom, how could you allow yourself to be so disrespected? And, so she looked at me and she said, this is the only way that I can provide food on the table for you and a roof over your head. And I think for me, it was just the realities of apartheid was not living, in separate communities. I think for me, the horror of apartheid was the dehumanizing. It was the taking away of one's dignity. So I think that is really, what was that was causing a wound, in my own life, and that gave rise to, bitterness, resentment, and that's how it got me involved in the struggle against apartheid, but really from a place of bitterness and anger. And I just shared the story at a large Khoi San. These are the indigenous people of South Africa. I was speaking on the healing and restoration of generational trauma, which a lot of indigenous communities and tribal peoples are experiencing around the world, at the hand of colonialism and other injustices. And an 82-year-old, for the first time, they said he cried as he responded, to my talk. And it was not a Christian gathering, but of course, I mean, the transformative aspect of what Christ has done, it's very real and came out in my talk. But so, I mean, these are just some of the realities in our life. And of course, God had to deal with me. I will never forget God healing that wound in my spirit, as a 5-year-old was on my DTS when a Afrikaans lady who lived in Scotland came to speak the last week on my DTS. She was tall and had this booming voice, and she had a word of knowledge in the middle of a teaching. And she said, some of you grew up in rural South Africa, and this was your experience. And she basically explained to me what happened to me as a 5-year-old. And I broke down and I wept, and she picked me up. I mean, I was much, leaner at the time as an 18-year-old. And she just held me in her arms and she wept. And that lady was Mariette Lowe. And she had a profound impact that even what used to be an enemy, God used that as part of my healing journey. And now, I'm speaking at different conventions, different settings around the world, Christian and non-Christian, speaking on healing and reconciliation. So that's just a little bit of my biography in that particular category.
Wow, I mean, that's moving. It goes to my gut, this one, So thank you so much, Edwin. I have so many more questions along that, but like having experienced that and having also grown up in that setting, I mean, how has that impacted you as in forming you to become the leader that you are today?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think what is important for me, I mean, that was such a powerful experience that I just recounted or shared with you. And I think for me, what is so encouraging is that, identity is very much connected to your leadership. I think for me, what I've learned is that at the heart of Jesus's leadership theology was his understanding of the fatherhood of God. And that has got to do with his identity.
Yeah.
So I think for me as a leader and my journey, even in the midst of the pain and the brokenness, and I'm still on a journey, is really, allowing that transformational reality of God, God choosing me, not so much, me having been in search of God, but God having been in search of me, finding me, and that spirit of adoption that really put me at the same level as anybody, even if you have had a better upbringing in a different part of the world, or even if you had a more broken upbringing, in your family story. But that spirit of adoption, it lifts you beyond your limitations. It lifts you beyond, what you've been through, the pain and the suffering. And so I think what I have learned, Tova, in this journey is that you have to forgive. I think like Bishop Tutu, one of the people that I respect hugely, he wrote a book, There Is No Future Without Forgiveness. Now, it doesn't mean that it's void of justice, but I do think that there is something that is so important in our leadership journey, and particularly that has formed my life, that I had to learn to forgive. And forgiveness is like a onion. It's one layer, upon another layer. So you never really arrive. Of course, there's grace for God to deal with stuff in your life where you forgive, but he takes it deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And so that has been, very pivotal in my own leadership journey and my own development. And that's also been the key, to my healing. And like I said, God at times would use the enemy as part of your leading journey. And that has been definitely the case. I remember I was leading my first DTS in YWAM. And of course, it was very, groundbreaking. And I think that's what I really love and respect about YWAM. Just being so prophetic, even with our own limitations in South Africa and around the world. But I think we always, are on the prophetic edge. And I mean, for me to lead a DTS, as a 20-year-old, I mean, and for the first time, having, white people under you, I mean, that was like, that was like radical. And I remember a tall white Afrikaner young man who broke down in one of the teachings, and then he just confessed how he used to drive with his dad's car after having been binge drinking, and to the closest township, and the first black man they would find on a bicycle, they would beat him, till he would lie sometimes lifeless, and they would do it weekend after weekend. And then he just wept and wept, and he asked me for forgiveness. And I mean, it was again that forgiveness, it just went deeper. I wanted to punch him, but he was 6'6", a former rugby player and a karate expert. So I said I had no chance. So all I could do was to hug him, and I held him in my arms, and it was really holding on and hugging the cross. And then he asked me, can I wash your feet? When he came to himself, and the Lord said, no, he should not wash your feet, that you need to wash his feet. And and so that's where, the victim at the end of the day, became the one that, ministered healing. So I think, we talk about power, power dynamics is so crazy, in these kind of situations. And so I think for me, even through our different experiences and some of the pain that we go through, I think as leaders, these becomes the most profound, raw material to make you a more kinder person, a more loving person, a more welcoming person, a more inclusive person, that is always seeking, to bring value to people's humanity and, to their life. Never allow these things to become, points of bitterness and hatred and resentment.
Oh, that's very, very good lessons. I was just thinking of your onion picture again. I've heard that before with the onion, but I thought there's tears at every level, isn't it? Every time, you take a level in that sense. So now you're in YWAM, and been for a long time, of course, but then you did enter, a quite white organization. We have to admit, still, it depends on where you are in the world, but still, when it comes to leadership, still, it is getting better. But how is that then? As a colored young man to enter that world?
Yeah, I think the big challenge is, and I think that is, to do with, ethnicity, that may even be to do with personality, and, so many different levels of separation. You're dealing with a dominant culture, and the dominant culture it's not necessarily that you are in the majority. You can be, you can be a base in the middle of Kenya, and you can have a Dutch leader, and you're gonna, a lot of the menu in the kitchen is gonna be bent towards more Dutch or Western, and you may only have one or two Dutch people, but the question is who's in, who called the shots, who's in charge. So that's really to do with the whole, sometimes what I call the dominant culture. It doesn't mean you're in the majority, but it's really who calls the shots.
That's right.
And so obviously I think for me, what I had to resist in my life, and it's not because out of rebellion. I think some of the accusations that have been made towards me when I started to ask questions about living quarters, just living quarters being allocated in South Africa at the YWAM base, to some white families, and then to some brown families. And so I was branded as having a spirit of anti-apartheid. Now you need to know, at the time, the anti-apartheid spirit, it equated you to being to being a communist. So now you're thinking, man, that's a good spirit to have. But I think in the narrative in South Africa at the time, those were the communists, the anti-apartheid movement in England and other parts of the world. But, so, I mean, I would ask the hard questions. But I think for me, what was very important is the whole aspect of authenticity. And there is this pressure upon, upon you, especially from a minority culture, or if it's, women in leadership, whatever that may be, is to assimilate. And I think that's probably the pressure that I have encountered, in YWAM, but also in missions and the church, global church, for that fact. And even though, the Western church is dwindling, it still has got a tremendous power in terms of, it's got this amplifier in terms of, money and media and all of that. But I think for me, what is important is as soon as you start assimilating, you start to have to change, how you talk, how do you approach things, so that it becomes translatable, for the dominant culture. And that's a challenge, because I think sometimes, by you having to make it translatable, or you want to make it palatable, you actually have to deny a part of you. And that kind of a thing of just, creating that sanitized space where we can't really be raw and have courageous conversations, I think it just creates more violence. And so I think for me, it was just navigating, through that. How do I stay authentic, and not, assimilate, but at the same time, I mean, how do I also become relevant, within my own organization and within my own movement.
Yeah, so good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. So Edwin, we ask a question every week. It's not just for you, but we ask a question about a mistake that you've made that we can kind of learn from, and we'd like it to be as juicy as possible. As no, but can you share it with us, a mistake that you would like to kind of share that we can learn from?
Yeah, I mean, just one mistake or just mistakes in general?
We've
Just the
got a lot of
biggest.
time.
Yeah, just a, no. I think for me it is. I think it's the whole. I think it's the whole area of self-control. Just because I'm a very choleric kind of a person, and sometimes I first say things and then I only think later. What I have said, and and I think this is just for me what I've learned is that trust can be built up over years, but it can be destroyed within a few seconds. And I think particularly how do we control what we say, our temper. And so I mean I've got examples of that, but I've just realized more and more how powerful your words are as a leader, specifically when God gives you influence and scope. And yeah, I've just found out again, even in my own community, not to mention any names, that I think it must have been 10 years ago, I've said something very casually to a particular person that's still part of my base. And how that just had such a devastating impact in their own life. I can't even remember it, but it was just pointed out to me, when one of my leaders, met with, now it's a family, and I've always experienced that standoffish over the last couple of years, and it was related to that one incident where trust has been broken. And so I think for me, we just don't know the collateral damage that we have as leaders by what we say, or how we say that. So I think for me that has been I think that to me has been something. Maybe another thing that's more like a fun part. I don't know if it's fun, but I've kind of I've challenged Lauren, and I mean that maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's not a good thing. So I. I was introduced to Lauren by Lauren to a couple in Kona, Hawaii in 2007, and in March. And he said, Edwin, this couple wanted to come and serve with you for 3 weeks in South Africa, and they want to be involved in a building project, with their 2 kids, and can you host them? And I said to Lauren, no. I said, it's not a convenient time for me, because I know that I was leading the leadership training school in the Philippines, and I wasn't going to be back in time, to receive them. I think 2 or 3 days, I would be arriving later in the country. And I just had the fiery eyes of Lauren look at me. And he said, in the beginning, the earth was void and without form. And I got a message. I was too implicational in my thinking, speaking to this visionary. And I think Lauren must have he must have said it with his tongue in his cheek, because that was the couple or family. Everybody wanted them to visit their base, and here I said, no, it's not convenient. And I just swallowed, and I said, yes, Lauren, I will receive them. I will make it work. That was 14 years ago. Wow. And this is the couple that probably became the greatest partners in seeing some of our township young people do DTS and go on an outreach that gives dignity, instead of just doing the cheap outreach. And but praise God, I had Lauren's rebuke. I adhere to Lauren's rebuke, and I've learned from that.
Thanks, Edwin. Really good. Well, I wonder if we can kind of dig into this theme of the month of power, where, and I guess it's not just talking about power theoretically, it's particularly where kind of power can be a temptation for a leader and can become something that really trips them up and can become abusive. I just wonder, in your own life as a leader, where have you seen power become a temptation, or what does it look like for that to be a pitfall for you, a potential pitfall for you as a leader?
Yeah, I think the first time when I heard about giving up of rights, I mean, I think that was quite a teaching, because I think at the time I had no rights. I mean, I was fighting for rights, but I think it's just looking at power and, rights just from such a different perspective. It's like from the bottom up, instead of from, the bottom, I mean, like from the top down. But I think for me, Johnny, I think all of us, in a way, we start off with, disadvantage in a way. That's just part of, growing up, learn independence, and then independence, and then we have to learn interdependence. But I think for me, this whole thing of power, I think it cut both ways. I think many of us, maybe not for you, but for some of us in Africa and other parts of the world, our experience is different, where we may feel disempowered. But I think then we grow to the place where we become the powerful ones. And I think that is where I think it becomes very destructive and become very abusive. So I think what I've always held in front of me is that a leader has got power, has got incredible power. Like I've shared, some of the biggest mistakes that I have made was to do with the wrong use of power, or even the casual way of having used my power. But I think for me, it has always been, that we do have power and be aware of it. But I think power is only safe in the hands of those who are willing to serve. And so I think for me, that has been, it's still a growing journey in my life. But if it is because I'm male, if it is because I'm a YWAM leader, if it is because, there's the perception of, I've got influence or connections. And I've said, to my leadership here, because we're such a very open community, welcoming everybody. I mean, that is being African. Your heart is never full. It's like an African taxi. There's always place for one more. And with that, people take advantage. And so, and I've said to my leadership and staff, I never want to use anything to do with immigration, as a way of, controlling people. And of course, it's the other way around. It's not the Africans that are going to Europe, where I know that migration policy has been used by YWAM bases as a place of power. Here we have the Europeans and Americans who love Cape Town, and they live in the beautiful surroundings and serving the city and the nation. But I've said, we want to, we never want that to become we never want that to become, we never want that to be weaponized. And so I think, we just have to ask ourselves. I mean, that's what I keep on asking myself. What are those things God has given me? Reputation, and power. But I think for me, it is always, it's always tempered with, it's not for your own benefit. It is always how you can open doors for others. And I know some leaders, they've used their YWAM connections as the door to the world. Just with the strike of the pen, they offer you to go to Europe or to America by filling in a reference form. That is very positive. That's wrong. I think that is where it becomes abusive. I think we have to use our influence generously, never for our own advantage, never for our own gain. And I think, never as a way to manipulate others. And I must say, have I made mistakes? So many. But I'm on a daily journey of just, keeping that in check, with others in accountability, but also, with the Spirit of God, still, teaching me His ways.
Thanks, Edwin. I just wonder, as we were kind of reflecting on what to ask, it strikes me that we are in a YWAM context, and YWAM is a very unique workplace and a very unique vocation. We give up, quite often we give up quite a lot of financial rewards to be in YWAM. There's no kind of a salary ladder, certainly not explicitly, that we're climbing. And so because of that, I sometimes wonder, is YWAM uniquely, do leaders, because we don't have any kind of salary cap to kind of jump up to, that power and position become more important to us, almost disproportionately important, because that's the only, maybe for sometimes it feels like the only reward you have is to get to call yourself director or leader, or of course we can't even do that now, you know. I wonder, can you reflect a little bit on YWAM and the unique way in which kind of power, position can become enticing for us as leaders?
No, I thought I arrived when I got to Switzerland, because I even had it was not just an office. I mean, for the first time I had an office in my whole YWAM life. So I'm not sure if that's maybe just akin to Europe. But I mean, I thought I've arrived, man. I had my own office. I even had my own computer and telephone. You can ask Elaine and Richard. I was just so chuffed. Maybe chuffed, is that a South African expression? I was just so impressed with myself. And I even had a sign that says, director, on my door. And I mean, as I was just settling into this, this life in Europe, my wife told me, she said, she's done, being Swiss and growing up in that same area. And I said, what, after 3 years, why do you want to go back to South Africa? She said, no, Switzerland is boring. I said, why is Switzerland boring? She said, no, because everything works. And I thought, I waited my whole life for something to work. And finally, I've got my office. I'm a director, and now you're taking me back to Africa. I do think that, there's something we have to be careful of. I always say no logo, no ego. I think we should not build our own empires. I think, and that's the teaching of Lauren, not building towers, but building altars, where we can really provide that space where we can have young people hearing the word of the Lord. And I think it's to do with vision, so we can either have a model where we have strong leaders with strong vision, and then everybody falls in behind us and they follow our vision. And they basically become, like the foot soldiers, that becomes a means to the end of our vision. I was so touched chatting to Sean Lambert, who interviewed Arlene, over several years to get, the book that we have now, Values Matter, out of her. And he said, he asked Arlene and Lauren, what was your strategy, with YWAM? What was God's strategy? Because now you're talking about probably the greatest strategists alive, with Lauren and Arlene. And Lauren said, God said to us not to have a strategy. But the strategy was young people that will come with a vision, and it's to empower them. And that's the strategy. I mean, isn't that just so, humbling? And I think that to me is the spirit of YWAM, that we don't build our empires. That I think for me, like I said, a Floyd that can walk away from Amsterdam and start all over again. Tova walking away from Rastinus, probably, great real estate. And I think for us, it's influence. And I think, sometimes for us, we can fall in the trap that maybe our reward is, climbing the YWAM ladder. But let me just tell you, Johnny, I think all of us, we have an illusion that there's an inner circle. I think once you get to that inner circle, you find that there's actually, there's actually no inner circle. So I think that's just the illusion that, somehow, sorry for the noise, somehow they can, we can arrive and we can be part of the inner circle. I think for me, YWAM is still bottom up, and that's how God is working. If you do something in the corner of India and God's hand is upon you, and God wants to highlight that, I think that is beyond the structures of YWAM, and I think that is how it should be. So, yeah. If you want to send me a check from Europe, I receive checks. But anyway, I'm back in Africa, and I don't have an office, even though we just bought our biggest building with new offices set up, and they made sure that there was no office for me. But anyway, I'm cool with that. But one day I will move back to Europe. But my wife, she's not ready for it yet.
That's sweet. I'll have to disappoint you and say we don't write checks any longer, Edwin. In Europe.
I know. Yeah. We don't have checks.
Yeah, the banks we don't have cash.
I think the same thing in South Africa. Actually, we're cashless. I mean, we are checkless. We don't
Yeah,
even have
yeah,
checks
yeah.
in South Africa.
No, exactly.
Anyway,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
maybe
Anyway.
let me just tell you one story that, some of our stereotypes that we have. I was traveling in the back of a taxi, a cab in Calcutta. I just spoke at the South Asia DTS Center gathering. And I was in the back with two of our Indian leaders. And so the DTS coordinator for South Asia, she's a good friend of mine. And then we were just talking in the cab, and she said, man, some of these Indians, they are, coming to YWAM from the village, and they've got more comfortable lifestyles, and they don't want to leave YWAM bases. And, she was just going on and talk about that. And then, the young man who's sitting next to me, he's become one of my, close friends, and he spoke up, and it was so refreshing. He said, to the DTS coordinator, he said, I just want to tell you that many of these young people that come into YWAM, they are foregoing college degrees, they're foregoing seminary degrees, and here they are in YWAM, and they have to trust God, for their own finances. Just for you to know, it's not for us a luxury, to come into YWAM. And I think it was just like, man, it's so easy to stereotype. And that's a little bit of a different coin, of the conversation, in terms of maybe how do we look at that?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Thank you, Edwin. Another question then, again, us being in this YWAM context, what do you think, where's the whole issue of power? Where is that commonly done, used, misused, and in what forms would you say? And what to watch out for here?
Yeah, I think for me it is, I think for me what will really, I think for me what will really be a game changer is that, at the end of the day, that we don't see our our education, the economies we come from, that it automatically is giving us the right to lead, wherever we are. But I think really for me, leadership is not so much a title. I think it's about ministry. And I think some of the biggest, mistakes that we have made, and we try to undo that, is that we've given people titles, by sheer by being first, on a location, or pioneer into a new nation. And I think that has been holding us back in terms of our growth. I think it is leadership comes through ministry. It comes through anointing. It doesn't come by if you've been there first, if you've been the pioneer. And so I think for me, it is, I think that's some of the mistakes that we've made. And that's where we've set up YWAM, especially in the 90s, where we had directors and many people who pioneered. And I mean, I praise God for these amazing people that have left, family and coming to, coming to the, these frontiers. But I think it's when they said that, it's when they basically attribute being first there, or the culture they're coming from, the resources they've got access to, that gives them the right to lead. I think it's by calling, it's by anointing, and I think we're moving in the right direction, as YWAM, particularly when it comes to the use of power. I think power is if we can enter into more unlikely friendships and relationships, I think that it will be a breath of fresh air for us in terms of who we are, in terms of our own faith, in terms of our own calling. And like I said, sometimes like myself, I find myself working in the interfaith kind of arena, and that doesn't mean that my faith becomes less. It basically means it is just becoming so much more crystallized in terms of what I believe, and my witness is even become much more powerful. You don't have to deny who you are, but I think for me, it's if we start really looking at the greater good, not seeing people as rich and being unreached, but actually looking at ourselves sometimes as the most unreached, and how we can allow ourselves to be touched by what we have considered to be unreached. I think it's that spirit of humility, and I think we're getting more and more of that mission. We've got more voices in that, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Oh, you're muted, Johnny.
Sorry. I think there's there's so much more we could really unpack about all of that stuff, but I appreciate not just what you're saying, but the spirit in which you're saying it. I wonder, we've got just a couple more questions left because we don't want to go too much over time. I wondered just about the question of mentoring. I know mentoring was important to Floyd, and I know it was, in the early days when you joined YWAM in the 90s was when there was this, a lot of talking about mentors and Günter Kraumann. And I wonder in your life, like who have been in your leadership journey, who have been the mentors, especially mentors that have helped to kind of transform your understanding of power and kind of have modeled some kind of power under as opposed to power over. Can you give us maybe a couple of names and maybe examples of how that happened? You're muted. You got to mute. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, Günter wrote the book in 1992, his thesis, Mentoring for Mission, and how Jesus trained the 12 for mission, not missions, but for mission. He made it very clear. And so I became his protege to see if it was going to work. I think Floyd wrote in his foreword that was the most important book that he has read, apart from the Bible, in the last 20 or 25 years. So I had the privilege, Johnny, to actually work as a protege and then as a partner with Günter for 4 years. And first, as a mentoree, but then we became really partners. And I think the goal of mentoring should always be that that person would that you would become partners, and that they would even, and I have spiritual ambition. I think not to be presumptuous, that I would do greater things than Günter. I would just do things differently, but I think there's always that spiritual ambition, and I've seen that, and that has been very transformational in my life. I think another person that has been having had a huge impact in my life, and that is just absolute positivity and belief in people, even amidst mistakes that they've made, is Darlene. And so she was my LTS leader. And then for about a decade and a half, I worked with her on the leadership training schools. And so I think that had a huge impact in my life. And then I think, my mom, she had probably the most forming impact in my life. I didn't know if I mentioned it, but I reconciled with my dad, even though he passed away when I was 11. But my mom had been a major influence in my life. She taught me economics, how to save, how to plan financially. She built pretty much, those leadership principles into my life. Honesty, integrity, all of that. So. So I would say these would probably be the three people that had the most impact in my life: a Khoi woman, an American, and a European.
Excellent, thank you. I was just reflecting as from what you've been talking. You say that leadership that is an influence, that is bottom up in many ways, and it's from serving. And I thought, and then it's top down in a sense that appointing and anointing that comes from God. So He appoints and anoints who He wants. So I just thought there was that mix right there, so it's just beautiful. Edwin, there's another question we always ask as we meet, because we are convinced that leaders, they read. And you already mentioned several books that really have influenced you. But what are some of the books that have influenced you over the last season, if you can say it like that?
I think there's, I always try to kind of like have a little bit of a broad, list of reading. So during lockdown, I think what really interested me is Adam Grant. He's a leadership professor, and he wrote a book, Originals. So I've enjoyed reading that. So anything that you can get, it's kind of like a little bit out of the Christian genre. It's more like leadership. He wrote another best-selling one. It's called I think giving or generosity or something like that. Yeah, so I think that has been very inspiring to me. I'm just busy reading, and that's maybe from Gunther's influence, the life of, oh my goodness, I just forgot his name now. He was actually a Scottish preacher. He died as a 27-year-old. So he just had a huge impact, not only in Scotland, but in the whole movement of revival, holiness, and so I'm actually just within the first 1-2 chapters of his biography. So that's some of my current reading that I'm doing, and then of course biographies. I mean, that's always something that spiritual biographies, something that is also something that I can recommend. Like Hudson Taylor and William Carey and others. Nelson Mandela. So yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay. Thanks, Edwin. Well, we've kind of come to the end of our allotted time. We could ask a lot more questions, but I think for your sake, you've had a busy day of speaking, so we should let you chill out and go and have a braai and maybe a cup of rooibos. But Edwin, I just on behalf of us, of Tova and I, but I think of many of us in Europe, maybe all of us in YWAM Europe, we want to just really thank you for your many years of service to our mission and to people, to real people. And you are a really beautiful model of a YWAM leader. You have big vision, big heart, and quick to serve and be kind and have that. In Irish, we call it having the gentle hand foremost. And you really live that life, and we can learn a lot from you. So thanks so much for really generously sharing this time with us. And I mean, it's an amazing story. You're coming from apartheid South Africa and seeing how God's using you today. And we certainly pray for your beautiful country to continue to be transformed by people like you and the people that you're training in Muizenberg. So thanks, Edwin, for your time. And
thank you so much. It's been a joy.
Yeah.
I just want to echo that. It has been really impactful, Edwin, and just loved hearing your story. Some of it I've heard before, but it was just so rich. And I can see in the thread as well that there are several people. It says, incredible story. Thanks for your testimony. I'm so sorry for what you had to go through. And finally, like, Edwin, thank you. So let it echo that we so appreciated this time. I want to just remind us all that the next theme, that is recharge. And how do leaders recharge? We go maybe from being on the highway going, well, I can go 130 here. I don't know where you can go where you are, but leaders see us so busy often, and then we go from 130 to beach chair. I'm not quite sure, So how do we do that? But the theme is recharge, and there's these short videos, and we really hope that you will enjoy them. A number of the editorial team and others of the ELLC, we have spent time in recording these short videos up to 5 minutes. So just hope that we will help you recharge as well. And after that, we'll come back in the kind of the more normal mode in September. And so then we've gone through again, power this month, and the next pitfall we're going to look at that. So that's going to be sex in September. But thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you back.